calling it a talk. I don't necessarily do lectures and the sort. So really the reason I'm here is that Edwin reached out and said that, you know what, you might have something cool to share, and I was more than happy to oblige. And again, I've been to the Echo office. I've sort of seen the community, really cool, really vibrant. So I was more than happy to have a conversation, and let's call it a conversation, and let's actually have a conversation. I won't want to take too much time, actually just going on a monologue, but would actually love using a good chunk of time at the end to answer questions, to get thoughts, to get criticism. I think that's probably the best part of speaking with people from the startup space, is that we don't hold back. We don't need pleasantries. If you think I'm an idiot, you can tell me I'm an idiot, right? So yeah, let's kick it off. I think to sort of pick up, and sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. I'm sitting outdoors, so Lego Streets. You guys probably know Lego Streets. How noisy they can be better than me. But anyway, to kick it off, right? To pick it up from where Edwin left off. So he talked about like building a team and why it's critical. I think this session itself won't necessarily focus on building, let's say, the entirety of your team. It's not going to focus on building an operational team. It's not going to focus on sort of getting entry to even senior management roles or mid-management roles. What we're going to focus on is sort of the top tier, and which is effectively the top management of a startup, or the senior management, sort of executive roles, etc. Right. So we're going to focus on largely that tier of employees or workers or sort of founders at a startup, etc. Whatever you want to call them. But the rationale behind that, and it's an age-old saying, right? If you could have a lion lead a pack of sheep, but they're going to all then act like the lion. If you have a sheep lead a pack of lions, they're all going to act like the sheep, right? So kind of going back to that.
Sorry, Lakshaya, sorry. Don't you have slides to share?
I do. I'm going to dive in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Cool. So yeah, I think that's the sort of tier of people that we're going to focus on today. So now let me share my screen. Again, the name of the sort of session kind of gives it, might give it a sense that it's sort of, we're talking about the holistic space. But again, the idea is that we want to focus on probably one topic, try to go a little bit deeper instead of, let's say, trying to do too much and then sticking to the surface and being rather superficial. But I guess to kick it off, right? I know that everyone's time is valuable. I hate it when people disrespect my time, and I don't want through the session to disrespect anyone else's time. So what I would love to do is actually share what I plan on sort of talking about through this conversation. And I mean, yeah, I guess, is it actually going to be worth it for the attendees on the call? I would love for you guys to answer that question, maybe once I've gone through the slide, right? So I'm going to cover broadly 4 topics. So one, I'm going to start with the most basic topic. It's going to sound like a 4-year-old is talking to you, but the fundamental functions of a startup, right? What is a startup meant to do? Why do startups even exist in the world of today? Right. The second topic then is the different archetypes of core team members at a startup. So core team, of course, is your leadership team, the people who are sort of ensuring that things keep moving, people who are driving the day-to-day sort of hustle from the top, not sort of on the ground, of course, but then at least from the top, and giving direction to the rest of the team, effectively who are pulling the strings of the startup, right? Then there's one of those 4 archetypes that I'd love to hone in on. Again, it's a limited amount of time, so I won't be able to go too deep, but at least one of those archetypes that in my mind makes or breaks a startup. And last but not the least, the 2 reasons most founders still fail despite knowing all of this, because again, what I'm going to say is not necessarily going to be groundbreaking or absolutely new, but it is, and sort of that is my expertise because I haven't introduced myself. So I am a consultant by background, and my skill set is basically common sense. And that's the only thing that I know. I'm not a founder myself, so but there are reasons why a lot of founders still tend to fail, despite having this sort of set of knowledge. And I think then hopefully, if anyone takes anything away, it is that let's not fall in the pitfalls. Let's acknowledge who we are, why we're here, and what we want to achieve with any of our startups or any of our businesses, right? So again, to answer the question, is this session worth sitting through? I don't know. I hope so. But it's not going to be a framework out of an MBA textbook. It's something that I've been coming up with for about for the last year or so. But I've also, of course, spent 4 or 5 years as an operator over here in African startups, and is based off that experience, right? So it's not something out of an MBA textbook. I'm not going to mouth off a framework which you could find in a textbook by Michael Porter, right? Cool. Let's dive in. And any Edwin, anyone else, feel free to stop me if there's anything that I should be covering that I'm not, or then if there's something that I am covering that I shouldn't be, right? Cool. But diving into the first topic, right? What are the three fundamental functions of a startup? Goes without saying, right? You need to break, you need to build, and you need to grow. It's literally the cycle of life as a startup. No startup idea came out of, hey, this already exists, let's do it again, right? You're probably not a startup if you're sort of doing something that's already been done in your context. Of course, that in your context matters a lot, because whether we accept it or not, we are living on a continent which is slightly technologically behind, especially if you compare it to the likes of the US, the UK, and sort of where innovation, sort of Silicon Valley started 30 years ago versus in Nigeria. The last 10 years have been great, right? So the context is important. But again, is it something new for my own context or for our context as a startup? Are we breaking the norm? Are we challenging a convention? Are we doing something that people would even call unsolvable, right? Who would have thought that doing financial payments, I'm based out of Kenya, who would have thought that making transactions, to anyone who's here aware of M-Pesa, would be as easy as a click on your mobile phone, right? The banking systems in Africa have not been historically some of the best in the world. Without blaming any specific central bank, there are some issues there that are unresolved, right? So these ideas which have been viewed as unsolvable, and you speak to anyone who's sort of 50, 60 years old, who's lived sort of their whole life doing business in the African or even in the Nigerian context, they will tell you that these issues can't be solved. But as startups, it is our prerogative to be solving those issues. Right? So until you're going to break an existing convention, you're not a startup. Until you take then that idea and then build on top of it, right? Are you using a method and that also also using a methodical approach to that problem solving? Probably not a startup, because again, anyone could come out there, sort of break something down, complain about stuff, and then leave it. But then do you actually come up with a solution? And this is, of course, the MVP, if you want to call it that. This is the thing that gets the first check in the door. But are you building something, and are you using a methodical approach to problem solving, right? Are you actually speaking to your customers? Are you actually trying to solve a problem that people face every day, and not being like every other billion-dollar business that exists, which is where sort of the thinking for the solution comes top down instead of sort of circular 360 thinking from sort of the audience, from different stakeholders that are out there. And last but not the least, unless you actually plan on growing, you're not a startup, right? Every startup needs to have that mission and that vision. At Fuzu, at the startup that I work with as global head of strategy, we call it the BHAG, the Big Hairy Audacious Goal. It was a term coined, I'm not sure by who, but it started off in 1978, if I'm not getting the year wrong. But it's your big, hairy, audacious goal. It's what do we really stand for at our core, right? And again, if you're not looking to grow, all you're doing is sort of breaking and building. You're probably building an SME, right? You're not building a startup, which is fine. There's sort of all of the respect in the world for someone who's building a small business, and small business owners effectively, that's where the world is going, right? Small businesses are going to be outnumbering big businesses massively, massively. They already are. But yeah, I mean, that's what the fundamentals of a startup are, right? And if you've started on any of these questions, you probably need to rethink your business or your own personal mission. So these are just the fundamental functions. I'm going to take an example, right? You're going to see what 7, 8 logos in the center over here. There's one here, which is my personal favorite from Nigeria, is Gokara. Personally, because I love their story. They built something that was really revolutionary. They tried to break a market. And they tried to grow it. And I mean, they grew so big that the government had to shut them down. Of course, that's not officially how the story goes. And I'm sure everyone in this room is aware of what happened there. But to me, that's an inspiring story. But I'm going to probably talk about the brand on this sort of screen that no one or very few people in this context probably have been exposed to. Of course, you might know the brand name, but probably haven't used the product unless you've been to the US and spent a ton of time there over the last maybe 3 years, right? We're going to talk about Paladin. So Paladin took the stupidest product, the most standard built up product, no innovation in that space for probably 20 years since the product was built, and put a TV screen on it, right? They took a treadmill and put a TV screen on it. The story is really interesting. It was Paladin was started by a cycling enthusiast. The guy sort of at some point, you can call him a revolutionary. This was in 2013. It's not so long ago. He's very much alive and kicking in New York. But sort of the story goes that he used to go cycling into Central Park, sort of used to, on all of these morning cycles, figure that, look, the more time he spent in the city, the more the population is growing, there's pollution, the air's dirty. At some point, sort of figured out that he would rather just work out at home, right? But the treadmill at home is boring, right? And also there's no motivation. So what did he do? He decided that he wants to fix that. And all of the research that he did said that a treadmill isn't something that needs changing. You either have the motivation internally that you can do it, or you don't. If you're not motivated to work out, you're probably not going to work out. He challenged that convention and then effectively said that he would unbore everyone, right? And he built Paladin out of that. Very simple concept: add a screen to your treadmill. There's going to be a trainer somewhere in the world taking sort of a lesson. You can join in, you can work out. There are leaderboards on who's, let's say, performing the best. One thing I hate about going to the gym, even sort of, I'm at a hotel and staying at a hotel in Lagos. The thing that I hate about going to the gym is simply that I have to do it alone, right? He actually put you put everyone in a team atmosphere. So there was people cheering you up. Sort of, if you've been struggling with it, you can sort of share it with the community, building a real community, right? And his grow moment happened in the pandemic. Paladin was doing really well, growing, I don't know, maybe 30, 40% month on month for a pretty long time. But in the pandemic, it really took off. I think the last article that I read about them was from late last year, where the company hit a valuation of $20 billion. A treadmill company hitting a valuation of $20 billion, absolutely unheard of before. And the founder himself was worth more than $1 billion, which he couldn't even have imagined in his wildest dreams, because he was just building a company in an industry which has been done before. But again, that just goes to show that if you break, if you build, and if you sort of have a real growth plan, you are going to succeed, right? So let's talk about then the 4 archetypes of actually building a core team at a startup, right? So again, we've talked about this framework of break, build, and grow, but it's really rare that you find anyone on leadership team who's only doing one of these, right? Who's only either great at breaking stuff, who's only either great at building sort of the first draft of a solution or the MVP, or who's only good at growing something, right? Because historically, I mean, we've seen all of the great builders, they've got at least 2 of these skills. If we talk about all of the startups that are now established companies, the Facebooks, et cetera, of the world, they lie at the intersect of all 3 of these, right? But independently, each of these roles are probably stuff that entry level people are good at doing, right? Independently, someone who can just break is whingy. I like to use the example of the United Nations. Sure, they're doing a lot of work, but when it comes to real impact, when it comes to stopping wars, all they're doing is complaining, right? A lot of public sector development organizations, unfortunately, do this, probably because they're so large, probably because they just have so much money. They just don't have the urgency or the motivation that a startup has. Startups cannot just be breakers. They need to then combine that breaking with building and growing. A builder by themselves is, in my mind, just a broke artist, right? Someone who says that they have an idea but never takes action on it is just your friend with a million ideas. I have a ton of these. I was one of these, and I figured at some point that I need to change, right? A grower is just an average employee. Everyone who's working at a large company, who's sort of happy in their 9 to 5, is great at growing. And again, there's a lot of honor in working that 9 to 5 and finding that work-life balance. But again, very rare that at startups you can do that, and you need to then combine all of this to break, build, grow, and then repeat that cycle. Let's dive in now into each of these one by one, right? Let's talk about what I'm going to do just to frame it first is we're going to look at sort of the combinations of twos now from this slide. So the intersections of building and growing, growing and breaking, breaking and building again. And then sort of where the magic happens is at the center of all three of these. So if we now look at the first combination, right? People who build and people who can grow. So these are people who don't necessarily have the skill set of breaking stuff, but they're really good at sort of taking ideas and then making it their own. They love to have ownership over topics and they want to go deep, right? Then they love accountability. They want to take stuff from 0 to 1, right? And I think what sort of for them, it's all about being able to constantly collect feedback, synthesize stuff. And these are growth roles, product managers, consultants of all kinds. That's the scaler. The second one there is then what you have is the A plus operator. Right now, the reason there's an A plus just on this, and you won't see this anywhere else, is that pretty much everyone in some way or the other can be an operator. And the grow role itself is an operator, right? Everyone sort of doing stuff, whether that stuff adds value is what then determines whether you're actually an A plus operator or whether you're just an average operator out there. But what makes an A plus operator in my mind is the ability to break stuff that already exists and that's so established, right? These guys actually don't just exist in startups. These guys exist in every traditional business, every big business that's out there. And to me, it's absolutely crazy that anyone can run a business without an A plus operator. These are your sort of chief operating officers, most CXOs actually, even CEOs do fall into or end up falling into this bucket. Operational team leads, country heads, right? The idea behind being an A plus operator is that you can take sort of convention that already exists, break that down, and then start effectively from a much higher ground than a scalar or then what the third archetype we'll see will start from, right? Which we're going to call the disruptor. But these guys can take something that's established, break it, improve it, and then continue growth. So they're usually well suited for scenarios where, let's say you've hit a certain point of growth, not necessarily important in your 0 to 1 journey, but really, really important, especially for every company, irrespective of what industry you're at, irrespective of what size you're at, pretty much after that. And again, if you have this person on your founding team early on, that's probably the biggest plus that you're going to get, right? So that's the A plus operator. And the third archetype and the last, which lies at a double intersect. So we're going to see sort of intersect of two of these bubbles or these vents is the disruptor, right? The disruptor loves to break and build, right? These are probably a lot of the people in this room, people who sort of take something, look at the norm, don't like it, right? Hate it, want to challenge it, and refuse to fall into place. So these are really your sort of your early stage startup founders, your thinkers who are willing to go to every degree to then sort of fix something that's broken, right? Now, I think the thing that actually sets apart a good disruptor, and in this room, what's going to set apart the great founders from the average founders who sort of going to continue to grow their startups, is going to be the willingness to admit that they're not a genius, right? That they don't know everything. And that's, I think, the common thread that I've seen. Now, this sort of presentation today won't go into individual examples, but this genuinely is the common thread that I have seen with most people who've been disrupting industries, whether that's in the US, where they want to talk about sort of the big fintechs in the US, or you want to sort of talk about the companies that they've acquired in Nigeria, the Paystacks of the world, right? All of them effectively sort of start off as a disruptor, and there's no other place in my mind where sort of a startup founder can kick off from, because it sort of effectively talks about that 0 to 1 journey, absolutely required. The drawbacks of being a disruptor sometimes, because again, but sort of the essence of being disruptive is that you're not overly structured. But then that actually has a plus side in itself, which is that there's a free thinking attitude, right? So the only way to actually disrupt is to have free thinking, let your mind wander. But then where these guys don't necessarily come in and sort of come in clutch really is that growth space, because they can build from 0 to 1 and then sort of what do they do next, which is when you talk about probably building a team around you, or then talking about the one archetype that makes or breaks the business, which we will go through in a few seconds, right? The final drawback with the disruptor is because they, let's say, often are sort of founders were used to just doing the 0 to 1 and then letting go, is that they're not always great with teamwork. But again, this is a skill that, I mean, between this and having a scaler on the team, if you can find two of those people, really well complemented and really easy to then fill those gaps, right? Product managers, CTOs, CPOs, certain marketing professionals, those guys are really good at being disruptors. So coming up with creative ideas, thinking out of the box and solving something that hasn't been done before. And then of course, there's the big bucket of founders, which goes without saying are largely disruptors, especially in the African context where things are still done in a very traditional manner in a lot of industries. And I'm sure you guys have been trying to solve those issues. So that's about the disruptor, right? But then coming to sort of the final piece of the puzzle, right? The one who brings everything together, the one without which I personally believe that no startup is never going to succeed, is the orchestrator. The orchestrator actually is really interesting role, and sort of this is something that, again, based off my experience, I've been thinking about, I've been coming up with. And this is not just experience then over here. I've worked in India for a few years. So based off sort of what leading startups are doing over there, and of course they're copying it from the US, right? I think sort of how this orchestrator role effectively kicked off in organizations is that a few US startups started doing it. They sort of took a few sort of consultants from MBBs and maybe the big fours, but usually MBBs, to sort of work at their startups, play a free thinking role, but then also bring everything together and effectively become the master of the orchestra, right? That's where it started off. Where it's really taken off now is, to be honest, India, which has been surprising to me because Indian startups, at least in my view, have not always been the most forward thinking. They have, at least historically, sort of still maintained a very traditional way of working while combining that with disruption. So they've been rather unique in their approach, but sort of over the last 5 years, this has absolutely blown up, where you're going to see chief of staffs, you're going to see founders office roles, and sort of roles which never existed. I mean, no one even knew what a chief of staff was 5 years ago, outside of the chief of staff to the sort of president of the United States of America. So there was one chief of staff globally probably a decade ago, and now there are hundreds of these working at startups and effectively being the glue to bring everything together, right? Now, just to caveat this is that, of course, it's not a role that necessarily has to come externally. Now, the best case for a startup, and I mean, if you're talking about founders, the best founders now have always been orchestrators, right? Before the startup boom happened, the founders who really made it were orchestrators. If you talk about Steve Jobs, sort of course, started up in maybe 70s, 80s, or a little bit off on the timelines on sort of when Apple began, but sort of who started off sort of in within those couple of decades. Of course, he was a breaker and a builder. He disrupted everything, but then he also knew how to scale stuff, right? He knew how to take sort of an average sort of computer and then make it something which is extraordinary, right? There were a lot of companies making hardware even at that point, sort of the IBMs of the world. Microsoft came probably a little bit later, but what Steve Jobs did, no one else did. No one else knew how to scale it the way he did. And that's because he sort of listened to his customer, right? That's what it all comes down to. But again, finding that sort of a founder who can do the 0 to 1, then sort of go from build to grow, and then move on to sort of, while continuing to grow your existing project, move on to the next project within that same business and break another thing and then grow that again, while still serving largely the same market or solving largely the same problem, is then the orchestrator. And this is the rarest skill you're going to find. And what sort of, as we go through the next couple of slides, it'll be really interesting, sort of at least my point of view, and feel free to call me out on this if you think it's bullshit. But my point of view is that this sort of not every founder now in today's date is an orchestrator. And that's why team building is going to be extremely critical. And I'm sort of hopefully as we go through the next couple of slides, it'll be clear why this is going to be extremely critical to success for most startups. So let's dive into sort of the one archetype now, sort of the orchestrator, and why companies need them, who actually is a good orchestrator, when did they become critical, and how do you find an orchestrator, right? So why the orchestrator is critical is that an orchestrator ideally is someone who's extremely versatile. They truly are a jack of all trades, right? You want them to sort of today come up with a 5-year strategy. Sure, they can do it. You want them to come up with a high-level financial plan to share with an investor. Sure, they can build a model in maybe 3-4 hours, right? You want them to actually dive deep and sort of understand how you can improve your customer support function. Sure, they're going to dive in. They're going to spend a whole day shadowing the customer support team and then coming up with an operating plan and coming up with an optimization plan on how this can be taken to the next level, right? So this person can effectively do every role at the organization, and not at the level where a CEO would do it, but at the level where a true operator would do it, and sort of gather those insights, bring it to the leadership team, and then effectively elevate the quality of everything that a startup is doing, right? Hopefully that's a visual enough representation where it's like truly about elevating something that might be great, but it's not world class, right? And in a world of competing priorities, their singular mission is to bring everything together, right? They need to be the glue that brings a startup together. And again, this cannot sort of, every company is not going to have a Steve Jobs, every founder is not going to be that brilliant. And again, it's all about then admitting it to yourself that maybe there's another role in the organization that needs to be filled, right? But what actually makes a good orchestrator? Now, there's no single profile for this, right? But there are a few threads which tie great orchestrators together, and that is structured thinking, understanding second and third order implications. So not just almost thinking of sort of a startup as a game of chess, right? With the game of chess, you're never just looking at the next move. You're looking at the move 3 moves down or 4 moves down. So let's take an example for this to sort of make it clearer. When we talk about marketing messaging, right? How often do we see, like, I mean, especially in today's day, people getting canceled, sort of someone saying something absolutely ridiculous and sort of their startup going up in flames for that. So one of those things, I mean, the role that an orchestrator would effectively play in such a scenario is if someone had just run by them, you know what, hey, Edwin, what do you think? What do you think? How do you think people are going to react to this sort of move that we're going to make, right? This marketing message. An orchestrator's job is to actually think that, all right, maybe the immediate audience loves it, the target market that you're looking at, but the target market will then, if it really goes viral, spread that throughout the world or throughout, let's say, at least additional markets. And how are they going to perceive it? When they further spread into even non-target markets, absolutely random markets, how are they going to perceive it? What are they going to react, right? Am I going to get canceled on Twitter because I didn't think about this? That's the role of an orchestrator, right? Think of second, third order implications. And I used a marketing example, which is easy to use. But I mean, think about your operations, right? Any big system changes you make, it has an impact in terms of maybe saving you money or making things more efficient. But how is the team going to react to it? How is that team's reaction actually going to impact the kind of talent that we need? Will people leave us en masse, right? So there are always second and third order implications of things, and this person needs to be able to see that, right? Then there's project management, and the two that I personally believe are the most important is fearlessness and common sense. This person in some ways is the bridge between operations, between leadership, between marketing, between everything that a startup is doing. And they need, like, at the base level, common sense, but most importantly, fearlessness, right? If this person's going to be afraid to, I mean, they might be great at thinking up ideas and sort of taking them from 0 to 1, but then are they going to be afraid of actually dropping off that message onto then the leadership team? If they are, then they're probably not an orchestrator, right? Then they're probably just an A+ operator, which is again a great place to be. But then at what point do these guys become critical? While they're always critical for a startup to win in their segments, organizations start to break without them when they're actually in the hyper growth stages, right? Again, going back to that whole ability to think critically and sort of to be versatile is it's going to help startups avoid a lot of growing pains and plug multiple management gaps, because again, it's all about wherever there's an immediate issue, this person is going to run in, plug in, and solve that problem, right? So largely, I would say that once a startup's raised their Series A through to when they're truly becoming an established business is when an orchestrator is most important. And then to answer the big question, how do you find an orchestrator? Now, if you're a founder who's done this 2 or 3 times, maybe succeeded 1 or 2 times out of those, you're more than likely going to be the orchestrator yourself because you have that experience, right? However, in case that's not you, in case you're a first-time founder especially, this is an increasingly common exit path for strategy consultants. So reach out in your network, reach out to the guys over here, sort of reach out to your networks at PwC, right? What is the strategy division doing the latest? Reach out to guys at McKinsey, reach out to guys at BCG. What are exit paths? What are the exit paths that they're looking at, right? Or, I mean, hire an ex-founder. A lot of founders, after building something, more than want to actually work at a business, sort of take it easy for a few years and work at a business where they can sort of use all of their knowledge. And you're never going to find that kind of knowledge, even in a strategy consultant, but use that knowledge to actually build something else while not having sort of that much pressure on themselves, right? So taking a little bit of time off almost in their minds. While it's going to be an intense role, for them, it's not as intense as being a founder themselves. So hire an ex-founder, or the moment you see someone who actually fits the bill, promote internally, right? This path is going to be slower, where it might take maybe a few years to go from intern to sort of an associate to then eventually chief of staff. But once you get there, you're in a really good spot. And then this person that probably knows your business inside out better than any other person who you hire externally could ever do. But coming then on to the last topic, and I'm going to shut up. I hate monologues, but I think a good sort of message to get across is that the biggest enemies of startup leaders, right, are one, finances. I'm sure if anyone on this call is trying to raise money, it's a pain in the neck. But then the last one is very often a founder's ego, right? I think very often, and again, I mean, if you're a founder who is sort of currently in this spot, I'm going to sort of consider this someone shaking you and telling you that, hey, founder, you can't do everything. Or if you know someone, right, if you're an operator, or if you work on a team where the founder is always overwhelmed, again, sort of grab onto them, give them a good shake and tell them that, dude, you can't do everything, right? You're the most valuable resource of this company. So stop trying to be everything. Try to do what you're best at, and then get other people, pay other people to do what sort of is required to grow the business, right? Now, going through this framework, I'm sure that a lot of people are thinking, hey, you know what? I am the orchestrator. I could probably do most of this stuff, but odds are still that you're not, right? To be honest, orchestrators are extremely rare. There's a very specific skill set that's required, which comes with, of course, experience, but then also comes with failure. And again, maybe people sort of who sort of do believe that, sure, please go ahead and do that. But don't self-evaluate is my only recommendation, right? If there's one point that I would ask everyone to take away from this, is that please don't self-evaluate. Ask an external advisor, not someone who's a friend, because a friend is going to be a yes man or a yes woman, but ask external advisors, right? People who actually want to see you succeed and grow, but don't necessarily care about being honest with you for their opinion, right? Or set up sort of a chat with a topical expert, right? Experts do this all the time. There are multiple folks that I can recommend you to. I'm happy to actually have a conversation with you guys myself. But there are people who can come in, evaluate yourself, evaluate your team, and then sort of actually tell you, right, okay, you know what, you guys have 5 disruptors on your team, which is great, but you're missing an operator or you're missing a scaler, and you have one sort of orchestrator who's not enough, right? The ratio for orchestrator to sort of rest of the leadership team probably needs to be 1:5, but anything more than that, and the orchestrator is going to start failing. And that's sort of the critical balance that most startups need to strike. And the last thing that sort of I have seen as a pitfall in this space, and again, I've been lucky that sort of Fuzu, as sort of the company that I work with, has not done this, but the money that is there, it exists to be spent. So cash burn is always better than crashing and burning, and your startup sort of shutting down because you didn't have sort of the founder as founder or as CEO, you were overwhelmed, right? So a raw talent in the sort of who does this really well, 3-4 years of experience is going to demand $3,000 to $5,000 in salary, and of course, while that's a lot for early stage startups, I would say that the moment you hit a Series A, this is probably the first role that you want to bring in to make sure that as a founder, you're not being absolutely slaughtered by the number of things that are coming your way, and you don't sort of lose direction for what is the BHAG or the big vision of the company, right? And again, the ROI on this role is immense. It's going to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars. I would sort of even promise you that if you hire someone who's really a top class talent over here. And again, at some point, the goal with sort of these roles is that they transition to a CXO or late founder roles, and they are worth every penny. So that's what that's where I'm going to stop and maybe open it up for a discussion, for a conversation. But again, topics that are not covered, that I've not covered today in the benefit of time are just like case studies, real life examples of startup leaders who actually fit these different archetypes. So there are leaders, again, who sort of, again, they continue to be the founder, they don't feel threatened. They continue to sort of be CEO, but then they're very knowing of their own sort of drawbacks that they have with their own personality or their own working style. And they know that, hey, I'm an operator. Let someone else do all of the hard stuff, and I'll pay them. Right? It's not coming out of my pocket; it's coming out of my investors' pockets, and it's going to help my startup succeed. And then you have sort of companies sort of globally who are combating the absence of orchestrators on their team, and sort of multiple case studies there. Startups sort of building this out really, really well. One startup that I would recommend that people look into is Slice. This is an Indian payments app, which is it's an Indian credit card app, which is targeting teenagers, which is really disruptive, really cool. I think they raised $40 million sort of just for like credit cards for teenagers, which is, if someone would have told me that 5 years ago, I would have laughed them off, right? I haven't discussed in detail the ideal ratio between the different archetypes, why it's 100 times harder for African startups to find orchestrators that are not founders. Again, a lot of African startups have orchestrator founders, but a lot don't. But it is really hard to sort of source this kind of talent in Africa. Again, for a multitude of reasons, some of it sort of going back down to just when you talk about sort of unemployment rates and sort of the education system, it isn't necessarily inculcating critical thinking, which is why, of course, if you find someone, and I mean, everyone wants to be that person who goes and studies in the UK and comes back and sets up a great business in Nigeria, right? But there are issues there, but there are solutions to it. Like every problem has a solution. And again, I'd be more than happy to chat about this stuff on how you can sort of find the right channels or strategies to find winning orchestrators. I'm going to leave my contact details on the screen. Anyone wants to set up a chat, feel free to. Also my WhatsApp number. Again, as I mentioned, I'm based in Kenya, so it's a Kenyan phone number. But feel free to reach out, drop me a question, call me an idiot. I'm fine with it. Just don't say anything more than an idiot. I'm a little bit touchy about these topics, but yeah. So that's my talk, and hopefully it's been helpful. I guess Edwin, over to you. How do you want to, I guess, run the next 15-ish minutes that we have?
Oh, wow. That was fantastic. That was very, very fantastic. Thank you very much, Lak. I've had so much fun. I've taken a bunch of notes. I think one thing I really enjoyed about this particular conversation has been that I've been in a lot of seminars, I've been in a lot of talks, I've listened to a lot of my mentors speaking to me about how to get the right team for a startup. And usually what happens is that they are always talking about, oh, you need someone to manage the money, someone to market, someone to be technology. And this is the first time I'm being in a conversation about the team, and I'm actually listening to more than just the hard skills, but also the temperament that I'm supposed to hire in my team, which I think is something that a lot of people really miss, because you can have someone who has fantastic skills at development and fantastic skills at marketing, but if he doesn't have the right temperament, it definitely is not going to fit very well in your team and not going to help you to grow. So this is why I really, really appreciate what you've done for us today. I appreciate your insights, and of course, like you said, this I'm going to recommend this recording to basically every manager I know. They need to, every startup founder that I know that's not in this, that they need to attend this program. I'm going to recommend this to go and listen to it again, because I think it's very, very essential for everybody who is managing a team, or everybody who has plans to start a startup, to understand the intricacies of selecting the right members for your team and getting the balance right. So thank you again, Lak. We're going to move to the next stage. I believe that you all have questions. Now, if you have a question for Lak right now, I'm going to just pick two people or one person, depending on how fast we can answer the questions. I want you to just signify by raising up your hand signify by raising up your hand, so that I will select you and you can mute your mic and ask me a question. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Please signify by raising your hand. You can either raise your hand or you can just signify in the chats and say, oh, I have a question I'd like to ask. Anything? Nobody? Okay, I have a question. So my question basically is, someone has a question. If you want, do you want to speak? Okay, someone has a question. It says, in today's parlance, what is the nearest nomenclature for orchestrator, for an orchestrator? Lab, can you?
Yeah, definitely. Let me take, I think I see a couple of questions actually now in the chat. So let's start with the nomenclature, right? So again, there's no nomenclature for an orchestrator. Ideally, again, if your founder or your CEO is an orchestrator, that's great, but it isn't necessarily the easiest role, which is why a lot of CEOs prefer to hire the right talent, right? But a couple of sort of roles that have started coming up and popping up globally are one what are called as founder's office or CEO's office roles. Now, these are not, these guys don't even have a job title. They're not going to be called a manager. They're not going to be called a specialist or an expert at anything, but they're going to be, what sort of the LinkedIn is going to say, for example, is that working at the founder's office at Slice, the Indian startup for credit cards for teenagers, right? That's all it's going to say. And sort of that is one way that it's being set up. And again, feel free to go sort of online and sort of look at what building a founder's office actually involves. But then the second role, which is again extremely increasingly common, is the chief of staff. Again, a chief of staff is the role which started off. The origination happened from the United States government, where the president of the United States has a chief of staff. If anyone's watched House of Cards, you probably sort of see this as a prominent role there. So yeah, it started over there. Sort of American startups took that concept and made it their own, where sort of they looked at what the chief of staff actually does is that all of the stuff like that the CEO does, but at a deeper level, where a CEO is probably, let's say, doing 25 things. Of those, what are those 10 things which actually require in-depth attention, which the CEO can't give, but still want slight oversight over, is what a chief of staff does. The chief of staff reports into the CEO, takes those sort of 10 specific things, like, and 10 things doesn't mean 10 things at a time, it means 10 things in a year, and goes really deep, sort of builds absolute excellence over there. And the goal of a chief of staff, sort of what they always have to start off with as their objective, is that how do I make my own organization the best in this sort of function or in this discipline? So founder's office, chief of staff roles are probably the most common, or sometimes they call the CEO's office the COO's office.
Wonderful.
Yep, I think moving on to the, sorry, Edwin.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so yeah, there's another question that says, what happens if you hire, made a mistake picking the wrong team? Like if you've already picked your team and you picked your team before you came to this talk and you've now realized that, oh, I have a wrong team. What's the next step what next step do you think you should do?
I think the moment you realize you pick a wrong team, you need to set things in motion. But set things in motion does not mean a knee-jerk reaction, right? It doesn't mean that you, let's say, go off on a tangent, sort of absolutely start firing people immediately. Again, when you talk about building a team, it's never a plug-and-play process for startups, especially because your founding team is probably pretty strong, right? You only start up with someone who you know is really good, but then your sort of first 5 hires are effectively what can make or break you in your early, let's say, first 12 months. Right. The idea sort of with sort of saying that I have a wrong team, I think I would first of all love to understand what that means in any specific context, right? So for some people, having the wrong team could simply mean that my team members actually don't have the hard skills required, in which case I I mean, if I'm being absolutely blunt, I would say you need to find replacements. If I'm sort of being, let's say, being sort of a better leader in some sense, even probably want to figure out, sort of have conversations with them, go through the longer process, understand why they're underperforming, right? And that is the right approach for most startups. But again, there are going to be times when startups have to make a tough decision, and no one but the CEO or the founder, sort of the ultimate decision maker, can do that. Not even the orchestrator in this case. But I think what's most important is then sort of having that sort of strong temperament as a leader, saying that, hey, you know what, if things aren't working, I'm gonna cut it off at the right spot. So not hanging on to something which you know will fail is probably the first big thing. Now, that's of course on the hard skill side. But if you see someone, sort of people have the wrong temperament, that that usually indicates two things, right? Is that one, you just made a sort of a bad culture fit hire, and the sort of the usual solution to that is it has to be done proactively, and you need to sort of figure out during your interview what are those questions you need to be asking to evaluate culture fit. Some people prefer personality tests. We at Fuzu sort of do that for sort of our own roles for our clients, and sort of I've made a ton of hires where I look at the personality test pretty seriously, right? Is this person, does their personality, do their values align with what my organization wants and needs? So that's what I would say is like in terms of temperament. But then if it's already too late, then you probably need to have a hard chat with people and again set sort of clear expectations, because again at a startup you need to communicate clearly with a deadline. Is that, look, either you're going to fix your attitude or you're going to fix your temperament over the next 3 to 6 months, or we can't be working together, because it's not just harming me as a startup, it's harming you as a person, because you would probably thrive in another organization, but you're not succeeding with us, right? So it's always about that conversation and always positioning it as the as a two-way benefit, as opposed to sort of going out there wildly and saying that, hey, you suck, you're not gonna succeed with me, and I need someone else. That's never the right approach. So it's always about sort of finding that two-way street, and that two-way sort of conversation also then usually blends into, in some sense, so what is a mutually successful relationship.
Oh, awesome. Thank you very much. There's another question. I'm not sure we have enough time to take it, but I think we do. I think we do. Let's next question. Since from a talent recruiter's point of view, what skill set are you looking for specifically? Example, a great marketer or product manager, or showing great leadership skill, or would we have to make this up as we go? I think this person is trying to understand if you're going to hire for a startup, what are the skill sets that we should look out for, apart from the temperament?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? To me, there are sort of startups increasingly are getting structured, which is beautiful, because the guys who did this 10 years ago, they were starting without a template. They were starting without an idea of sort of what is the right team to build. Some of them succeeded, some of them didn't. But now the reason sort of there is this, you can call it a bubble if you want to, but there really are sort of increasing valuations globally, and in Nigeria, sort of the Series A paycheck is sort of the Series A check is $30 million now, so which is insane, right? But now there is a template for most roles in terms of what you should be looking for, right? And while sort of there is a template, the one caveat that I would have is that probably don't believe it blindly. Take a template, marry it to your own startup needs and who you are as, let's say, a hiring manager or as a founder, because without that, you are going to struggle a little bit, at least, in sort of finding the top talent and making them stick with you. But if you're talking about sort of specific roles, to sort of answer the question more directly, is talking about great marketer, product manager, etc. There are sort of some common threads again between sort of all roles. And again, Google search is going to give you a more comprehensive list than I will on this call. But then what you always need to be thinking about is like, does this person have one domain expertise? Does this person have the passion for actually going out there and failing? So maybe you can just call that being headstrong. And again, that's just more of a temperament point, but like domain expertise, the ability to learn. I think the ability to learn is probably the second big thing that I would look at. and sort of between domain expertise, ability to learn, and temperament, I personally don't think I've ever looked at a third thing. I think domain expertise in itself is a massive topic where each role has like tons of things that you should be testing. But yeah, I think those are the three things, and outside of that, probably nothing else that I think startups necessarily need to look at. Of course, you can check hard skills testing and all of that stuff, but that is, I guess, part of that's a subset of domain expertise. What I don't look at personally is the CV. I don't care about credentials. I care about who this person is and what did they bring to the table, instead of what does a piece of paper say that they bring to the table.
Wonderful. Thank you very much again, Lakshaya. You've been very, very helpful. You've been very, very insightful, and you've passed on a lot of knowledge. So we've come to the part of the show that I say is my favorite, because this is the part where I get to give away 1,000 naira worth of credit to one person who has been paying attention to this, to LAC, since the very beginning of this program. Now, I'm going to post a question on the global chat, and the first person to give me the most correct answer will bet to win my prize. Again, let me repeat that. I am going to post the question in the group, in the chat for everyone to see. And the first person to give me the best answer, or the most correct answer, it doesn't have to be absolutely correct, but the most correct answer by the first person is going to be the one to get to, get my prize. And I'm going to be picking anyone at my own discretion. All right. So I'm going to post the question now. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to try and get the answers in, and I will announce the winner when I'm done. So the question is going live in 1, 2, 3, go. Your 30 seconds. About 10 seconds more. I'm going to give, nobody knows. Is it that difficult? Wow. Just list one. Anybody? Anybody at all? All right, I'm going to give just one example, and I'm going to leave you to guess the remaining two. All right, there's still like there are 4 rules. I'm going to give you just one more, one example, and I'll leave you to guess the remaining 3. All right, I'm giving you 10 more seconds again. Come on, guys, come on. Nobody? Nothing at all? Finally, I can see everybody rushing with the answers now. Okay. All right. I'm closing it now. Now we're done. I'm going to give there's someone that's sending answers to this group that I cannot award this prize to, because it will be conflict of interest. So please, that person to stop sending answers to this group. Thank you very much. Okay, so far I think I'm going to give this to, wow, this is really hard. I'm going to give this to, wow, this is really, really hard. Why is it so hard? I'm going to give this to, I think the first person to get the most answers was, what's her name again? Adironke. Congratulations, Aderonke. You got the roles actually are CTO, CPO, marketing, and product manager. And everybody was writing CPO, and some people were repeating CPO, which I felt like I've already given you the answer, so you can't repeat that to me. So she was the first person to say CTO. So pretty much the only person that got another answer correctly. So Aderonke, please send me your number personally. I'm going to credit your account now with 1,000 naira credits. To the rest of us, thank you very much again. I hope you had a wonderful time with Lakshaya. Please remember to join our Telegram group. Follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn for more exciting program. Remember, this program hosts every Thursday at 5 p.m. Please make sure to attend. Next week is going to be another fun time with everyone. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. It's going to be insightful. It's going to be entertaining, and it's also going to be a place where we can learn. Remember that this was brought to you by Creative Vision Center. My name is Edwin Najogun. I'm the country director, and I'm the host of this particular program. Thank you very much. I'm waiting for your number, Aderonke. You can join if you can't you can join the Telegram group and share your number there. I'll also say it there. So I have to close this meeting now. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great time, and please stay safe. Observe COVID rules, and be in good health. Thank you very much, and see you next week.